Hi, Misha here, and I have another model for you to take a look at. Quite a famous aircraft today, or infamous, depending on your point of view. This is the MV-22B Osprey, manufactured in cooperation between Bell and Boeing. And this model is a 172 scale diecast made by Air Force One. And I looked online, and if I missed it, I do apologize, but I could not find any reviews of this, so thought I would mention it because it's a really interesting history and a very interesting model. As you see it here, it is in its stowed configuration for fitting on board an aircraft carrier or other compact space. We will look at it in other modes throughout the video. The Osprey is a really different aircraft. It's part helicopter and part turboprop airplane. It dates back in great part to the failure of Operation Eagle Claw in 1980, trying to rescue hostages in Iran. In that mission, helicopters were used, but not very effectively. They had many troubles. They even crashed into each other because of too tight formation flying. It was a debacle. So, the following year, under the new administration, the JVX, Joint Vertical Takeoff and Landing Experimental Program was started. I shouldn't say all. The Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Force all participated, with the Army taking the lead initially. However, the Marines were probably the most excited about it because of their mission statement, and their own fleet of helicopters were getting quite old, so they had a need. And they were working with the British Harrier already, so they had some experience with VTOL aircraft. Well, by 1983, several things happened. For one, the Navy, Marines started to kind of take predominance, preemptiveness in the program. The requirements had been laid out a year earlier. Several companies had initially shown interest, including Westland from the UK. But the only company to really come up with a complete design that met all the requirements of the program was a partnership between Bell and Boeing. And the partnerships like this were encouraged by the government because of the unique nature of the airplane. So later that year, they were awarded a contract, and development began. In 1985, it received the designation V-22 Osprey, and in 1986, Bell and Boeing, the conglomeration, were awarded a full contract for prototypes, which went into production that year, and the first one was rolled out and shown to the public in 1988, with the first test flights in 1989. So what exactly did they come up with? Like I said, this is the stowed position, but This thing was both a helicopter and a plane. And first, they would try it, test it as a chopper. So here we are in our basic vertical takeoff landing mode. So it's set up like a helicopter. This piece rotates here, and these nacelles rotate to the vertical position to give two propellers pointed upwards to act as choppers. The wings unfold. It's actually neat. This model comes with this folded set, and they're actually hinged in the middle. You can actually move the wings in and out, or the blades. So they are articulated, but you get a set of folded or folding propellers, props, and then you can easily just plug in a set of deployed ones and rotate as needed. Also, the flaps on the backs of the wing here move. Also, the flap on the back of the tail can move. And even the cargo door on the bottom can be opened up with a ramp inside, if you wish. And it's actually sealed with a magnet, so it's pretty neat. And if you look at the front, there is a cockpit with two Marine pilots inside. There's actually a lot going on with this model. That's why I liked it. And it's almost all entirely metal, which is pretty neat. Yeah, even these engines are metal. The wing is metal. The body is metal. I think even the even the tail is mostly metal. Yeah. Heck, is there any plastic on it? Okay, the flap is plastic, and the propellers, of course, are. Hey, these flaps are actually metal too. So the tail is plastic, and your propellers, and that's about it. Of course, the cockpit glass. Anyway, they would first try this out in early 18. I can't talk tonight, so I apologize. They would first test fly this as a helicopter in early 1989, and then later that year, around September, they would try it in horizontal flight mode as an aircraft. It is capable of either vertical takeoff or short takeoff, because it does have wheels. And the idea was simple. They wanted the flexibility of a helicopter with the speed and range of a conventional prop airplane. Now, this was not a combat aircraft. This was designed from the get-go to be a transport for cargo or troops. So it would go into combat zones for sure, but it was not an offensive aircraft in that sense, because they have much more capable jet fighters, bombers, and even helicopters for that. But there was a need for something that could deliver troops into tight locations like a chopper. But the problem with a helicopter like the old Huey, it was relatively slow, and it had a relatively low altitude and a relatively short range. It was very vulnerable to anti-aircraft missiles or even small arms fire. Something like this can fly much higher and much faster and essentially stay out of range of anything from the ground. So with the initial test flights out of the way, they would continue working on this. In 1993, the V-22B B was introduced, which was an upgraded variant after the initial tests. I think they had about 4 or 5 prototypes. They would identify some ways they could improve manufacturing, also ways that they could lighten the load and also lower costs, just a whole, and of course a lot of technological updates because this had been in development for 10 years. So this became the B. And the initial order at this point was mostly the Marines. Going back to 1989, the Army dropped out. They said they just didn't need it. This is getting towards the end of the Cold War. Yeah. And the Navy stepped back. They were still interested, but they were pretty much received orders from on high that couldn't really spend more money on the Osprey. That left the Marines and the Air Force. So the initial order was for 360 Osprey for the Marines, 50 for the Air Force, and 48 for the Navy, and none for the Army. Interestingly, a number of Republicans were opposed to this in the early to mid-90s, but the Clinton administration was in favor and actually was a big champion of the Osprey. To that end, the first of the pre-production series entered into production in 1997 and were delivered in 1999. The designations originally were going to be MV-22B for the Marines, like this critter here, CV-22B for the Air Force, and HV-22B for the Navy. However, the Navy would eventually change the classification to CMV-22B. Got all that? I know it's boring, but hey, there you go. Unfortunately, in 2000, as this entered kind of the second phase of testing in the military, there were 2 very high-profile crashes of Osprey, and nearly 23 Marines lost their lives. Although I believe some of those were actually civilians. Wikipedia says Marines, but I believe, remembering back all those years, there were some civilians either injured or killed. The first crash was, at the time, and still I guess technically is, attributed to pilot error. It's a very new, radically different aircraft, understandable. But the second was design faults. Bad wiring, controls, you never know 100% with the crash, but yeah, it was the design. And so yet again, it was very close to just being canceled. But, of course, 2001, 9/11, and defense spending is again increased, and the need for this aircraft in places like Afghanistan, and then later in 2003, Iraq, was exemplified, and the Marines were really pushing for it. So it was saved, and by June of 2005, the Osprey had completed its kind of advanced testing, and they had gone through a few different generations. Bell-Boeing had worked out all the bugs, or at least enough of them, that it was cleared in June of 2005 for full-scale production. And it would first be declared operationally ready by the Marines in early 2007, and from there it would get its first baptism, there we go. Told you I can't speak tonight. Baptism of fire into Iraq later that year. Do my best to keep this in frame or get you something in frame, guys. It's a little difficult, as you might imagine. Well, here we are in flight mode. Essentially, to go to horizontal flight as an airplane, we just rotate our nacelles forward. This is all automated, all the rotation and such. They don't normally fold the wing unless they have to, just to save wear and tear on parts, but the nacelles from helicopter to plane mode rotate very easily. This allows them to be much more fuel efficient and achieve much greater speed and all of that, and just a better cruise. A lot of advantages to rotating. This plane, this aircraft, is about 57 feet long, so she's not little. And we have a wingspan of about 45 feet. And that's not counting the rotors. Each of those are 38 foot. Making it nearly 85 feet side to side if you consider all of that. This can carry up to 20,000 pounds internally, or 15,000 pounds externally using 2 hooks, kind of like the old Chinook. Sorry, it's getting so heavy with the stand on it, it's not wanting to rotate. It can carry 24 troops comfortably seated, or up to 32 if you just cram them in like, well, Marines in an Osprey. It's not armed except for one door gun on the ramp, which isn't even always there. It's just a 30 caliber 7.62 NATO FN M240, I believe. In more recent years, they have made an optional Gatling gun, still in 7.16 NATO, to go underneath the fuselage to be remotely used from the cockpit. But this is not usually deployed unless it's needed, because it does add nearly 1,000 pounds to the plane and decreases, of course, what it can carry otherwise. But it is an option. This has a crew of 4, pilot, co-pilot, and 2 flight engineers or cargo masters. As I said, this first went to Iraq in September of 2007 and was being used to deliver Marines by October. After 2 years there, not a single Osprey had been lost to enemy fire. Pretty good record considering the combat. A lot of it had to do with this aircraft's speed. Initially, it could get up to about 300 miles per hour and cruise at about 250 to 260. But in 2011, they actually conducted a series of upgrades which increased top speed to nearly 320 miles per hour with a cruise of 270 miles. They also improve the lift capability and ceiling. This can get up to about 25,000 feet, so well out of the range of small arms and most man-portable anti-aircraft things. Typically also, the Osprey will be escorted by Super Cobras or other attack helicopters. So after a rocky start, the Marines seem to be quite happy with their Ospreys. Yes, I know there's a bit of controversy about the trustworthiness of some reports, but I'm not going to get into that here. This is just a fun model review with some history. I don't want to get into politics, and I will never call a Marine a liar, so not doing that. Sorry. But they do seem to be quite safe now. I mean, they should be after 20 plus years of working on that. In recent times, they've received a new processor, again, because it took so long to develop. A lot of the electronics and computer systems were dated. So, around 2012 to 2015, several of the electronics computers were updated. And yeah, the Marines have successfully operated these with a good showing in Iraq. They started to deploy these in Afghanistan in November of 2009. Moving back, the Air Force obtained their first CV-22 in 2006. They first tried it on a mission as a search and rescue craft in 2007. They had a couple of humanitarian missions in 2008 for testing, and they declared it fully operational in 2009. The Navy has been slower to adopt it. They did initially try the Osprey on a carrier way back in the 90s, but they did a new set of carrier trials in 2015 in preparation for operating the CMV-22B off of carriers, and they plan to have that going by 2021. They did decrease their order from 48 to 44, and they plan to use their Ospreys for search and rescue, of course transport for cargo and people, and interestingly as an anti-submarine aircraft, kind of doing the job of the old P-3 Orion. Interesting, I think, but then again, I am distinctly a nerd. So it has found a niche. To date, they've made about 250, I do believe. So it's unsure if the original planned 460 number will be achieved or not. There's been a bunch of back and forth. There were some budget cuts again as the wars kind of wound down, but then again, it seems like every time this aircraft is about to be called out, it comes back. It is unique. It is the first tilt rotor, as it's referred to, aircraft to go into full production anywhere in the world. And if nothing else, it does mark an interesting place in aviation history. And since it has gone into service, its safety record really has been quite excellent. Not perfect, of course, but quite excellent. And it does distinctly offer some advantages over an airplane or a helicopter. So only time will tell, of course, but a unique piece of American history dating all the way back to the Cold War. And definitely iconic for Iraq and Afghanistan. And as most probably know, this was cleared for use as Marine One for the White House, first transporting Secret Service and other politicians in 2013. I think it transported the First Lady last year. And I'm not sure, this is June of 2019, if the President has been on board making it officially Marine One yet or not. I don't know. I'm more into military history. So that's an interesting thing, though, that it has kind of taken up, we'll call it diplomatic transport. And it has received quite a bit of praise. Well, guys, appreciate you tuning in. I hope this kind of first look at the Air Force One model, I hope you're able to see something. It's kind of a hard one for me to do, but it's such a cool model that I really wanted to show you. Again, it has your little pilots inside, and the cargo bay opens. It's pretty much fully articulated. My only gripe, the wheels do spin, which is neat. They're not just, you can roll it. But they are permanently extended. They are not retractable. It's a little odd because most of your Air Force One models do have optional in-out gear, but, I guess with everything else going on, they just didn't. Another small gripe, and this is kind of Air Force One in general, their planes do have exposed screws. Right here you hopefully can see one. and not a deal breaker, especially since no one else is doing a 172 diecast Osprey, but it's like, oh, come on, guys. But the flip side to that, they use a lot of metal, and they do have a lot of articulating parts. If this were a Hobby Master, I bet they would have this nacelle, this wing system, more of interchangeable parts versus having one part that moves. And it does feel very solid. It doesn't have flop to it. In fact, when I was moving it in between video takes, I really had to use both hands. It snaps in very securely. It's kind of spring-loaded. So it has a good feel of quality to it. I was actually telling the wife in between the takes, too, that this is built well enough that it could almost be a toy for a kid. I mean, it does feel very sturdy. Heck, if you remember some of the G.I. Joe plastic, vehicles from the 80s, it's probably more sturdy than those. In fact, my parents never liked those because even if kids took care of them, they just seemed to break. Anyway, I digress. Most of my vehicles when I was a kid were die-cast, and they lasted forever if you took halfway decent care of them. They even would survive a firecracker or two. Not that we ever tried that out, of course. But yeah, I encourage you to check this out. This, I will say, was the last one. I picked this up from Aikens Airplanes. Nice people over there. I'm not betraying Pete. In fact, I got a shipment in for him just yesterday. But I've also found the folks down at Aikens to be very helpful, very friendly. I think it was Stephanie that helped me out over the phone because my internet was being a jerk. And she was real happy to find this for me. I don't think even they knew they had this version. I've read that newer ones don't come with these folding rotors. They just have the deployed ones. So I wanted to get a model that had the rotors. And at first she didn't think they had one, and then they found that actually they had this one left that does have both sets. And since there was no real price difference for one with two rotors sets or one, obviously I jumped on this last one. And another thing that's really cool, and this is just based on where I live here in Arkansas and where they're at in Mississippi, it's 1-day delivery. I ordered that Tuesday about 1 p.m. and this came with FedEx at about 11 a.m. the following Wednesday. So I can't beat that. I mean, that's Amazon speed right there. So I have to give credit where credit was due. I'm just happy with it. It's neat, it's interesting, and it sits really nice next to my Marine Aviate Harrier and another Marine craft. By the way, that in the back there, if you see it, was intentional. It was on the table. We were doing work pictures, and I just kind of left it in. Anyway, guys, I hope you were able to see something. I did my best. I hope you understand. But if you get a chance to pick one of these up, I recommend it. You can usually find them for about $80 to $100. But considering that no one else is doing one, and how metal it is, and good feeling, and how many points of articulation, I don't mind it. Air Force One is one of those brands. As long as you know what you're getting, I haven't been disappointed. I started with that SR-71, again, because no one else was doing it, and was happy with it. And I might pick up their P-61 Black Widow next. That was a World War II plane. Again, no one else does that, so I kind of go to Air Force One when no one else has something, and I haven't been disappointed yet. Alright, I've rambled on long enough, guys. I appreciate your time. If you'd like, please comment. And if you have one of these models, I'd love to hear your own experiences with it. Might have been good so far, but I just got it yesterday, so could change. And if you could, like, share, and subscribe. And even though this one didn't come from good old Pete, he does carry Air Force One. If you'd like to help him and help support the channel, go over and use code Misha to save 15% down at Pete's Collectibles. Well, this is Misha, and I will catch you very soon. Very soon, next time.